The rifle cracked just as Evelyn Hart stepped through the open gate of Boone Creek Ranch. The shot was not meant for her, but the bullet struck the wooden post less than a foot from her shoulder, sending a splinter of pine against her cheek. Her mare, Daisy, shied sideways, nearly throwing her from the saddle. Across the yard, a ranch hand shouted, "Hold that horse!" Evelyn gripped the reins and steadied herself. Her heart hammered, but she refused to panic. She looked toward the distant pasture where a young cowboy was struggling with a frightened steer and a rifleman was trying to scare the animal away from the fence. Then Evelyn looked back at the splintered post. She had ridden 40 miles for a job. She had not expected her first welcome to come with a gunshot. And she had no idea that before the day was over, someone would accuse her of bringing trouble with her. The cold Montana wind had been following Evelyn since sunrise. By the time she reached Boone Creek Ranch, her fingers were stiff around the reins, and the hem of her brown wool skirt was stained with road dust. Her mare, Daisy, was hardly better. The old chestnut had spent most of the morning climbing frozen trails and crossing shallow streams, her breath rising white in the morning air. Evelyn slowed her near the main house. Boone Creek Ranch was larger than anything she had ever seen. The ranch house stood beneath a wide Montana sky built of dark timber and pale stone. Beyond it stretched fenced pastures, barns, corrals, and long rows of cottonwood trees whose leaves had already turned gold. Dozens of cattle moved slowly across the distant field. For a moment, Evelyn simply stared. She had heard about Nathaniel Boone's ranch all her life. Men said he owned more cattle than some small towns had people. They said he paid his workers fairly, kept his word, and could tell a good horse from a bad one with one glance. They also said he did not tolerate dishonesty. That last part mattered to Evelyn, because her family had been accused of exactly that. She dismounted carefully and tied Daisy near the hitching rail. Her hand went to the small leather valise hanging from her saddle. Inside was a letter of recommendation, 2 changes of clothes, a comb, and the last $10 her mother had managed to save. $10. That was all that stood between them and an empty kitchen. Evelyn looked toward the ranch house. She thought of her mother waiting at home. Margaret Hart had been coughing for weeks. The winter was coming early, and there was no money for a doctor, much less enough food to last until spring. Their landlord had already warned them. Another missed payment, and they would have to leave. Evelyn had promised her mother she would find work. She had not told her how frightened she was. At 19, Evelyn had learned that fear was easier to carry when no one else could see it. She picked up her valise and walked toward the office. Inside, a broad-shouldered man with gray hair was sorting papers. He looked up. "Can I help you?" "My name is Evelyn Hart, sir. I'm here about the housekeeper's position." The man's expression was neutral at first. Then she handed him the letter. His eyes moved across the page. They stopped at her surname, Hart. "Yes, sir." He looked up again. "Samuel Hart, your father." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the handle of her valise. "Yes." The man slowly folded the letter. His name was Walter Briggs, though Evelyn did not know it yet. "You should have mentioned that before coming all this way." "I didn't think my father's name was part of the job requirements." Briggs stared at her. Out here, names matter. Evelyn knew that better than anyone. For 2 years, the name Hart had followed her like a shadow. Samuel Hart had once been respected. He had worked cattle-trained horses and ridden for miles through bad weather without complaint. Men had trusted him with their livestock and their money. Then Edwin Cole had been murdered. Money had disappeared from the ranch payroll. Samuel had been arrested. The evidence had been enough to convince a jury. He had been sentenced to prison. Since that day, people had stopped remembering the man Samuel had been. They remembered only the word attached to his name, Convict. Briggs handed the letter back. "We don't hire a convict's daughter." The words struck harder than the cold wind outside. Evelyn looked at him. "My father may be in prison, Mr. Briggs." Her voice remained calm. "But I am not." A few men outside had begun listening. One of them lowered his head, hiding a grin. Briggs leaned against the desk. "Miss Hart, people around here know what happened. So do I. Then you know why this ranch doesn't need trouble." Evelyn felt the humiliation rising in her throat. But she thought about Margaret. She thought about the empty flour bin. She thought about the landlord's warning. Then she straightened. "I came here to work, not to ask anyone to forgive my father." Before Briggs could answer, a deep voice came from the doorway. "What seems to be the trouble?" Everyone turned. Nathaniel Boone stood there. He was a tall man in his early 60s, with silver in his dark hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent half his life outdoors. His coat was heavy, his boots muddy, and his eyes sharp enough to make a grown man reconsider a lie. Briggs stepped aside. "This is Evelyn Hart." Nathaniel's gaze settled on her. There was no recognition at first. Then Briggs quietly added Samuel Hart's daughter. Something changed in Nathaniel's expression, only slightly. But Evelyn noticed. She had become very good at noticing small changes in people's faces. Nathaniel looked at her valise, then at her worn boots, then back at her. "You rode here alone?" "Yes, sir." "How far?" "About 40 miles. For a housekeeper's position, yes." Nathaniel studied her for several seconds. Why? Evelyn could have said many things. She could have told him about her mother's illness. She could have told him they were nearly broke. She could have told him that her father was innocent. Instead, she simply said, "My family needs me." The answer seemed to surprise him. Nathaniel glanced toward Briggs. "Was she given an interview?" "No, sir." "Why not?" Briggs hesitated. "You know who her father is?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I asked whether she was interviewed." "No, sir." Nathaniel looked back at Evelyn. "You know what people will say if I hire you?" "Yes, sir." "And you still want the job?" Evelyn swallowed. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I can work." For the first time, something almost like respect appeared in Nathaniel's eyes, but it disappeared quickly. He turned toward Briggs. "Give her the trial." Briggs frowned. "Mr. Boone one day?" Nathaniel looked at Evelyn. "You'll clean the guest rooms, help in the kitchen, organize the laundry, and prepare supper for the crew." Evelyn nodded. "If you can't handle the work, you'll leave. I understand. And if you can—" Nathaniel paused. "Then we'll talk." He walked away. Evelyn stood still for a moment. She had expected rejection. Instead, she had been given one chance. It was not kindness. It was not forgiveness. It was an examination. She was determined to pass. By noon, Evelyn's hands were already aching. The ranch house was larger than it looked from outside, and the work seemed endless. The kitchen had been poorly organized for months. The laundry room was overflowing. 2 guest rooms needed cleaning. The dining room needed polishing. Briggs seemed determined to find another task every time she finished one. "Those windows need washing." Evelyn nodded. "Those blankets need folding." She nodded again. "And supper is at 6. I'll have it ready." Briggs walked away disappointed that she had not complained. By late afternoon, Evelyn had learned the rhythm of the ranch. She noticed things others had stopped noticing. The kitchen wasted half a sack of potatoes every week because no one stored them properly. The laundry was being washed in batches too large for the available water. The pantry shelves were disorganized. She fixed what she could without drawing attention to herself. She did not know that Nathaniel Boone had been watching from the far side of the dining room. He noticed. He noticed everything. Nathaniel had built Boone Creek Ranch by paying attention to small things. A loose fence board could become a missing cow. A careless bookkeeper could become a stolen fortune. A dishonest employee could destroy years of trust. That was why he had never been willing to ignore a man's past. Samuel Hart's conviction had made Nathaniel cautious. Yet Evelyn Hart was beginning to make him question that caution. When supper was finally served, 22 ranch hands sat at the long table. The food was simple but plentiful. No one complained. No one went hungry. Afterward, Evelyn returned to the kitchen. She did not realize Nathaniel was standing in the doorway. "You've worked 12 hours, he said. She turned. "I can finish the dishes." "That wasn't what I asked." Evelyn looked down at her red hands. "My mother can't afford for me to come home without this job." Nathaniel was silent. "And your father?" Her eyes lifted. "What about him? Do you believe he's innocent?" Evelyn held his gaze. "Yes." Nathaniel said nothing. Evelyn picked up another plate. "My father taught me that a person's name is only worth what they do with it." She looked toward the dark Montana fields beyond the window. "I'm trying to make mine worth something." Nathaniel watched her for a long moment. Then he walked away. That night, after the ranch had gone quiet, Nathaniel entered his office and opened an old wooden cabinet. Inside were records from the year Edwin Cole had been murdered. He pulled out the payroll ledger. The pages smelled of dust and old paper. Nathaniel turned them slowly, then he stopped. One page was missing. His eyes narrowed. He turned back to the previous entry. There was a signature beneath a payment that Samuel Hart had supposedly collected. Nathaniel stared at it. He knew Samuel's handwriting. He had seen it many times. That signature did not look right. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods. Inside the office, Nathaniel Boone remained perfectly still. For the first time in 2 years, A question he had never allowed himself to ask began to take shape. What if Samuel Hart had never stolen that money at all? By the following morning, the question about Samuel Hart had not left Nathaniel Boone's mind. He sat alone at his desk before sunrise. The old payroll ledger opened beneath the lamp. The missing page bothered him, but the unfamiliar signature bothered him more. Nathaniel had known Samuel for years before the murder. He had watched the man sign cattle receipts, supply orders, and payroll records with the same steady hand. This signature was wrong, not obviously wrong. Whoever had written it had studied Samuel's name carefully, but the pressure of the pen was different, the final stroke too hurried. Nathaniel closed the ledger. He did not yet know what it meant. He only knew that something about the Hart case had never sat right with him. Across the ranch, Evelyn was already awake. She had slept in a small room near the kitchen, though sleep had come in short pieces. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Briggs's voice telling her to leave. She also remembered Nathaniel's final words. "If you can handle the work, we'll talk," so she intended to handle it. Before dawn, she carried a bucket to the kitchen well and began preparing breakfast. The ranch was quiet at that hour. Frost covered the grass, and the mountains beyond the pastures were pale beneath the first light. Evelyn had grown up poor enough to understand the value of quiet mornings. Quiet meant there was still time to work before trouble arrived. She had just finished setting bread to rise when Rose Keller entered the kitchen. Rose was a young woman who had worked at Boone Creek Ranch for nearly 3 years. She was responsible for mending clothes and helping with the laundry. She stopped when she saw Evelyn. "You're still here?" Evelyn looked up. "Mr. Boone gave me a trial." Rose shrugged. "I heard." There was something cold in her voice. Evelyn returned to her work. Rose watched her for a moment. "People are talking. They usually are. They're saying Mr. Boone shouldn't have let you stay." Evelyn pressed the dough flat with the heel of her hand. "What do you think?" Rose hesitated. "I don't know." That answer was more honest than Evelyn expected. Rose looked toward the window. "My brother knew your father." Evelyn stopped working. "What did he say?" "He said Samuel Hart wasn't a bad man." For the first time that morning, Evelyn looked directly at her. "What happened to your brother? He left Montana after the trial." Rose lowered her voice. "He said there was something wrong about the whole thing." Before Evelyn could ask more, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Rose immediately returned to the laundry. Briggs entered. His eyes went first to Rose, then to Evelyn. "Breakfast in 40 minutes. It will be ready," Evelyn said. Briggs noticed the bread. "Don't waste flour." "I won't." He walked away. Rose waited until he was gone. Then she whispered, "Be careful around him." Evelyn frowned. Why? But Rose had already turned back to her work. By breakfast, the ranch was awake. Cowboys came in from the cold, stamping snow from their boots and filling the dining room with the sounds of conversation. Evelyn moved between the kitchen and dining room serving coffee and hot food. She heard her name several times. She pretended not to. One ranch hand, a broad young man named Eli Turner, asked another quietly whether the new girl was really Samuel Hart's daughter. The answer came before Evelyn could walk away. "That's what they say." She kept moving. A few minutes later, Nathaniel entered. The room became quieter. He sat at the head of the table. Evelyn brought him coffee. "Thank you." It was the first time he had spoken to her that morning. She nodded and returned to the kitchen. Nathaniel noticed the room had changed since she arrived. Not dramatically, just enough. The meals were better organized. The coffee was hot. The workers were served quickly. It reminded him of something his late wife had once told him. A good household did not announce its work. It simply made life easier. He wondered whether Evelyn understood that instinctively or had learned it through necessity. After breakfast, Nathaniel found Briggs in the office. "I want the old payroll records brought out." Briggs looked up. "Which one's Edwin Cole's year?" There was a brief silence. Why Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. "Because I asked." Briggs nodded. "I'll find them." Nathaniel watched him leave. Something about the man's reaction disturbed him. Meanwhile, Evelyn was cleaning the guest room when she heard raised voices outside. She stepped toward the window. Nathaniel was standing beside the corral. A young horse had broken loose and was kicking wildly against the fence. One of the ranch hands was trying to catch its bridle. "Stay back," someone shouted. The horse reared. The ranch hand stumbled. Evelyn dropped the cloth in her hand. She ran outside. "Don't chase him." Everyone turned. The horse was frightened, not aggressive. Its eyes were wide and white foam covered its neck. Evelyn remembered her father's voice. "Never fight a frightened horse. Give him somewhere to go." She moved slowly toward the animal. "Easy." The horse jerked its head. Evelyn stopped. She waited. Then she stepped forward again. The ranch hands watched in silence. She reached the horse's shoulder and placed one hand against its neck. That's it. The animal trembled. Within moments it stopped fighting. Nathaniel stared. You've handled horses before. My father taught me. He looked at her carefully. Again, Samuel Hart's name stood between them, but this time Nathaniel did not see a convicted man. He saw the evidence of a father's teaching. That afternoon, Evelyn discovered the ranch's laundry room in complete disorder. Blankets, shirts, towels, and work clothes had been piled together. She began sorting them. Rose watched. You don't have to do all that. If I don't, tomorrow will be worse. Rose smiled faintly. You really are Samuel Hart's daughter. Evelyn looked at her. Is that supposed to be an insult? No. Rose shook her head. My brother said your father always worked that way. He never left a problem for tomorrow if he could fix it today. Evelyn's expression softened. For a moment she could almost hear her father's voice again. By late afternoon, clouds had gathered over the mountains. The wind grew stronger. Nathaniel stood outside the barn, watching the sky. An early winter storm was coming. He ordered the men to bring the cattle closer to shelter. Evelyn helped prepare the kitchen for a larger supper. The storm arrived before sunset. Snow struck the windows hard enough to make the glass tremble. A messenger came riding in from the northern pasture. One of the younger ranch hands had been injured. Nathaniel immediately gathered 3 men and prepared to leave. Before he stepped outside, he looked toward Evelyn. Keep the kitchen warm. She nodded. Then he was gone. The hours that followed were tense. Evelyn kept water boiling and blankets warming. Rose helped her prepare a room near the fire. When the men finally returned, they carried Eli Turner between them. His face was pale. His leg was badly bruised and his hands were already stiff from the cold. Evelyn immediately began working. Get him closer to the fire. Someone moved the chair, not too close, slowly. She remembered what her father had taught her. Warm a person gradually. Never rush frozen hands. Keep them awake. Keep them talking. Nathaniel watched as she directed the men without hesitation. The doctor arrived nearly an hour later. After examining Eli, he looked at Evelyn. You kept him from getting worse. She shook her head. My father taught me. Nathaniel heard the words. Again. Always her father. Later, when the house had quieted, Nathaniel found Evelyn alone in the kitchen. You've had quite a day. So have you. He almost smiled. Then his expression became serious. Your father taught you a lot. I did. Do you miss him? The question surprised her. Yes. Nathaniel looked down. I imagine you do. Evelyn wiped her hands on a cloth. Everyone thinks I should be ashamed of him. And you know. Even if the court found him guilty, Evelyn's eyes hardened. I know what the court said. That wasn't my question. She looked directly at him. No, Mr. Boone, I'm not ashamed of my father. Nathaniel said nothing. Evelyn continued quietly. Hunmod mistakes. Everyone does. But he didn't kill Edwin Cole. How can you be so certain because I know the man who raised me? She looked toward the window. When I was little, he used to tell me that a person's character was built in the things nobody saw. He said it was easy to pretend to be honest when people were watching. Nathaniel remembered the missing ledger page. And what did he say about money? That a man who steals money doesn't just steal money. He steals someone else's time, work, and trust. Nathaniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. Those words sounded like Samuel. He returned to his office after midnight. The ranch was silent. Nathaniel opened the old cabinet again. He placed the payroll ledger beside several receipts from the year Edwin Cole died. He compared signatures. Samuel's handwriting was strong and slightly slanted. The disputed signature was similar enough to fool someone who wanted to believe it. But Nathaniel had known the man. He knew the difference. He reached for another document. The receipt showed that Samuel had supposedly collected the payroll money on a Tuesday afternoon. Nathaniel checked the ranch schedule. Samuel had been assigned to the northern pasture that day. He could not have been in the office at the time written on the receipt. Nathaniel leaned back slowly. Outside, snow covered the ranch. Inside, the old evidence seemed to rearrange itself before his eyes. For 2 years, he had accepted the simplest explanation. Samuel Hart had stolen the money. Samuel Hart had killed Edwin Cole. But now there were too many small things that did not fit, and Nathaniel Boone had built his fortune by knowing when something did not fit. He closed the ledger. Tomorrow, he decided he would ask for every payroll record from that year. Not because he trusted Samuel Hart, not yet, but because he no longer trusted the story he had been told. The next morning, Nathaniel Boone was waiting in his office before the sun came up. On his desk lay every payroll record he could find from the year Edwin Cole was murdered. He had spent half the night comparing signatures, dates, and amounts. The more he looked, the less certain he became. Samuel Hart had supposedly collected the payroll money on a Tuesday afternoon. But the ranch schedule showed Samuel had been nearly 20 miles north tending cattle. Nathaniel ran his finger along the page. Someone had lied. The question was who? He heard footsteps outside his door. Walter Briggs entered carrying a stack of ledgers. "You asked for the old records." Nathaniel looked up. "Put them there." Briggs set them on the desk. For just a moment his eyes moved toward the open ledger. Nathaniel noticed. "Close the door." Briggs did. Nathaniel held up the disputed receipt. "Do you remember this?" Briggs studied it. "It's been 2 years. You were ranch manager then?" "Yes." "Who handled payroll?" Samuel did. Nathaniel watched his face. Every time Briggs hesitated. Most times. Nathaniel leaned back. "That's not what the records say." Briggs said nothing. Then he shrugged. "People make mistakes." Nathaniel's voice remained calm. "People do. Records usually don't." Briggs's expression tightened. "I've got work to do. So do I." Briggs left. Nathaniel waited until the door closed before looking at the old ledger again. Something was wrong. And now he knew he needed someone who had been there that night, someone who had no reason to protect anyone, someone who had nothing left to lose. He remembered a name, Thomas Reed. Evelyn knew nothing about Nathaniel's investigation. She was too busy trying to keep the ranch running smoothly. The storm had left deep drifts of snow against the barns, and the men were spending most of the morning clearing paths and checking fences. Evelyn worked beside Rose in the kitchen. While they prepared breakfast, Rose finally spoke about her brother. "He really did believe your father was innocent." Evelyn stopped slicing bread. "You said he knew him." "He did. Then why didn't he testify?" Rose lowered her eyes. "He was afraid of losing everything." Evelyn understood. People always imagined courage was simple. Stand up, tell the truth, refuse to be silent. But when a person's home, wages, family, and future were all at risk, courage could become much more expensive. "Where's your brother now?" Evelyn asked. "North of here. He lives alone." "Do you know where?" Rose nodded. She hesitated before giving Evelyn the location. "Why are you asking?" Evelyn looked toward the window. "Because if he knew my father, I need to know what he remembers." Rose's face grew worried. "Be careful." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I've been careful my whole life." She did not tell Rose that she had stopped being afraid of other people's opinions a long time ago. What frightened her now was something else. The possibility that her father might die in prison while everyone continued believing the worst about him. That afternoon, Nathaniel rode north. He did not tell Briggs where he was going. I took one horse and followed an old trail through the snow-covered hills. Thomas Reed's cabin stood beside a frozen creek half hidden by pine trees. Nathaniel knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Finally, an older man opened the door. Thomas was thinner than Nathaniel remembered. His beard was gray, and his left hand shook slightly as he held the door. "Nathaniel Boone, Thomas." Thomas looked past him. "You shouldn't be here." "Why?" "Because some things are better left alone." Nathaniel stepped closer. "I don't believe that anymore." Thomas's eyes hardened. "Then you're 2 years late." Nathaniel entered. The cabin was small and cold. A wood stove sat in the corner. Nathaniel placed the old payroll receipt on the table. "I need you to tell me what happened the night Edwin Cole died." Thomas stared at the paper. "I already told the sheriff. You told him what you were willing to tell him." Thomas looked away. Nathaniel waited. After several long moments, Thomas finally spoke. "I saw someone. Who I don't know." "You just said you saw someone." "I saw a man leaving Edwin's office." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. "When late that night, Samuel Hart number." The answer came quickly. Nathaniel leaned forward. "Then, who?" Thomas swallowed. "I couldn't see his face." "Why didn't you say this at the trial?" Thomas's jaw tightened. "Because Briggs told me if I opened my mouth, I'd never work in Montana again." Nathaniel felt something cold settle in his chest. Walter Briggs. Thomas nodded. "He said nobody would believe a ranch hand over a respected manager. Did you see where the man went?" "He rode south, toward town." Number Thomas stared into the fire. He went toward the old Mercer Road. Nathaniel's expression changed. "Caleb Mercer." Thomas nodded. He had business with Edwin. Nathaniel stood. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Thomas gave him a bitter smile. "Because 2 years ago nobody asked me what I knew. They only asked me to agree with what they already believed." The word stayed with Nathaniel as he rode back toward Boone Creek Ranch. By the time Nathaniel returned, Evelyn had been working since before sunrise. She was carrying folded linens through the hallway when she heard Briggs arguing with someone in the office. She paused. "I don't care what you found," Briggs said sharply. "Those records are private." Nathaniel's voice answered. "They belong to my ranch." Evelyn moved closer. Briggs lowered his voice. "You're digging into a dead man's murder for the sake of a girl you barely know." Nathaniel answered quietly. "I'm digging because something doesn't add up." Evelyn stepped away before they could see her. She did not want to be accused of listening, but the words stayed with her. Something doesn't add up. For the first time, hope appeared in her heart. Not enough to trust, not enough to believe, but enough to make her wonder. Could her father truly have been telling the truth all along? That evening, Evelyn was summoned to Nathaniel's office. She entered carefully. Nathaniel stood near the window. "I need to ask you something." "Yes, sir. Did your father ever mention Edwin Cole many times?" "What did he say?" Evelyn thought for a moment. "He said Mr. Cole knew someone was stealing money." Nathaniel turned. "When did he say that? Before he was arrested? Why didn't you tell anyone? No one asked." Nathaniel looked down. "Did Samuel ever say he was afraid?" Evelyn nodded. "He told my mother that if anything happened to him, we should never trust the people who claimed they knew everything about the case." Nathaniel felt the weight of those words. Did he leave anything behind? Evelyn hesitated. "There was an old bookkeeping notebook." Nathaniel's attention sharpened. "Where is it? I don't know." "Did you see it?" "Yes. Before my father was arrested." "What was in it?" "Numbers, names, payments." Nathaniel stepped closer. "Do you remember any names?" Evelyn searched her memory. One name appeared more than once. "Who's Caleb Mercer?" Nathaniel went still. The same name Thomas Reed had mentioned. He now had two separate pieces of testimony pointing in the same direction. But before he could ask anything else, the office door opened. Briggs stood there. His face was pale. "Mr. Boone, we have a problem." Nathaniel turned. "What kind of problem?" Briggs held up a set of papers. "These financial records are missing." Nathaniel stared at him. "Which records?" "The ones from the year Cole was killed." Silence filled the room. Nathaniel walked to the desk. He opened the cabinet. Several folders were gone. His eyes moved toward Evelyn, then toward Briggs. Someone had entered his office. Someone had known exactly what to take. Briggs looked at Evelyn. She was working in this part of the house all afternoon. Evelyn felt the accusation before he spoke it. "You think I took them?" "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Nathaniel raised his hand. "Enough." But the damage was already done. Within minutes, several ranch hands had gathered in the hallway. Whispers spread. The convict's daughter, the missing records, the old murder. It was exactly the kind of story people wanted to believe. Evelyn stood in the center of it, feeling the same shame she had felt on her first morning at the ranch. Only this time, something inside her had changed. She was tired of proving she was not guilty. She wanted the truth. "If you believe I stole them," she said quietly to Nathaniel, "search my things." Nathaniel looked at her. "I don't believe you stole anything." Briggs stepped forward. "Then, where are the papers?" Nathaniel's eyes hardened. "I intend to find out." Evelyn turned away. She walked upstairs to the small room she had been given. Her hands shook as she opened her valise. There was nothing inside except her clothes, her comb, and the letter that had brought her to Boone Creek Ranch. Then she remembered something. Her father's old words came back to her. "When people want you to forget the past, that's when you should look closer." Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed. She suddenly remembered the old storage room, the place where discarded household ledgers were kept, the place where she had seen her father's handwriting before. She stood. If someone had stolen the important records, perhaps they had overlooked something nobody thought was valuable. She took a lantern and quietly left her room. Downstairs, Nathaniel was still questioning the men. Briggs was watching him closely. Neither man noticed Evelyn slip toward the storage room. She opened the door. Dust filled the air. Old account books were stacked along the walls. Evelyn lifted one box after another. Then she saw it. A battered black ledger with a faded leather cover. Her father's handwriting was on the first page. Her breath caught. She opened it. Names, dates, payments. And beside several entries was the same name she had just spoken to Nathaniel, Caleb Mercer. Evelyn turned another page, then another. Her father's handwriting became increasingly hurried. At the bottom of the final page, Samuel had written only one sentence. "If they discover what I know, they will make sure no one believes me." Evelyn stared at the words. Outside the storage room, footsteps approached. She quickly closed the ledger and held it against her chest. Someone stopped on the other side of the door. The handle began to turn. The handle began to turn. Evelyn pressed the ledger against her chest and stepped backward. The door opened. Nathaniel Boone stood in the doorway. For one long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nathaniel's eyes dropped to the battered book in her hands. "Where did you find that in here?" He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. Evelyn held out the ledger. "My father's handwriting is in it." Nathaniel took the book carefully. He turned the pages beneath the lantern light, his expression growing darker with every entry. Names, dates, amounts, payments that had never appeared in the official ranch records, and beside several of them was the name Caleb Mercer. Nathaniel reached the final page. His eyes stopped. "If they discover what I know, they will make sure no one believes me." He read the sentence twice, then he looked at Evelyn. "Your father knew." "I think he did." Nathaniel closed the ledger. "Did you show this to anyone?" Good. Evelyn frowned. "Why? Because whoever took the other records may be looking for this one." The words made the room suddenly feel smaller. A floorboard creaked outside. Nathaniel turned toward the door. Someone moved away down the hallway. He opened it quickly, but the corridor was empty. Evelyn felt the old fear return, not fear for herself, fear that the truth had finally become dangerous. Nathaniel looked at her. "Stay with me." They walked together toward his office. Neither of them noticed Walter Briggs standing in the shadows at the far end of the hallway. He had seen the ledger in Evelyn's hands, and he knew exactly what it meant. Nathaniel locked the office door. He placed the ledger beside Edwin Cole's letter. For several minutes he said nothing. Then he began comparing the entries, the stolen payroll money, the missing records, the payments to Caleb Mercer. Everything connected. Samuel Hart had not been stealing from Edwin Cole. He had been documenting the theft. Nathaniel's face hardened. "How did I miss this?" Evelyn looked at him. "You believed what everyone else believed. I should have known better. You couldn't have known. I could have looked." His voice carried something Evelyn had never heard from him before. Regret. Nathaniel opened Edwin Cole's letter again. The final lines were clear. Edwin had discovered that money was being diverted from the payroll accounts. He had suspected Caleb Mercer was involved. He had written that Samuel Hart had tried to warn him. Then the letter ended abruptly. Nathaniel stared at the paper. "Edwin wrote this before he died." Evelyn nodded. "Then my father was telling the truth." Nathaniel looked at her. Yes, it was the first time anyone with authority had said it to her. Not perhaps, not maybe, not we'll see. Yes. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She turned away so Nathaniel would not see. But he did. He understood then that Evelyn had spent 2 years carrying the weight of a verdict that had never belonged to her. Nathaniel's voice softened. "We're going to bring your father home." They found Thomas Reed the following morning. Nathaniel brought him to the ranch before sunrise. Thomas entered the office and looked at the ledger. His hands trembled. "That was Samuel's book. You recognize it?" Thomas nodded. "He kept records of everything. Why didn't you tell anyone?" Thomas looked at Evelyn. "Because I was a coward." Evelyn shook her head. "You were afraid. That's another word for it." Thomas sat down. Then he told them everything. On the night Edwin Cole was murdered, Thomas had been repairing a fence near the ranch office. He heard voices. Edwin was arguing with Walter Briggs. Caleb Mercer was there too. Thomas had seen Briggs carrying a leather satchel. He had heard Edwin say that he would expose the stolen payroll money. Then Thomas saw Samuel arrive. Samuel had not gone there to steal. He had gone there to warn Edwin, but before Samuel could leave, Edwin was dead. Thomas had seen Briggs and Mercer leave through the back door. Samuel had been found beside the body. That was enough. The sheriff arrested him. Briggs controlled the ranch records. Mercer controlled the witnesses who depended on his business. Samuel had no money to fight them. The case had been decided before the trial ever began. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When Thomas finished, she asked one question. "Why did they let my father live?" Thomas looked down. "Because killing him would have made people ask questions. A conviction was cleaner." The words left a terrible silence behind them. Nathaniel stood. "Then we're going to make people ask questions now." Walter Briggs did not wait for them. By noon he was gone. His room was empty. So was the stable where he kept his horse. Nathaniel immediately sent 2 men toward town. But Briggs was not their only concern. Caleb Mercer was still free. Nathaniel knew the man would run if he learned the truth was exposed. He sent word to the county authorities and gathered every piece of evidence they had. The ledger, Edwin's letter, Thomas Reed's testimony, the forged payroll signature, the missing records, and the account books proving Mercer had received money that had disappeared from the ranch payroll. For the first time in 2 years, Samuel Hart had something more powerful than a daughter's belief. He had evidence. 3 weeks later, the prison gates opened. Evelyn stood outside with her mother. The autumn leaves had nearly disappeared from the trees. The air smelled of frost and wood smoke. Then Samuel Hart stepped through the gate. He looked older than Evelyn remembered. His hair had turned gray at the temples. His shoulders were thinner. But when his eyes found his daughter, something in his face changed. Evelyn. She ran to him. He caught her in his arms. For several seconds neither spoke. Margaret stood nearby, crying openly. Samuel finally pulled back and looked at Evelyn. "You grew up." Evelyn laughed through her tears. "You missed a little." He touched her face. "I wanted to come home, I know. I never stopped believing you'd understand. I did." Samuel looked toward Nathaniel. The two men stood facing one another. Nathaniel removed his hat. "I owe you an apology." Samuel said nothing. "I believed the evidence," Nathaniel continued. "I believed what everyone told me." Samuel's expression remained tired. Most men did. Nathaniel looked at Evelyn. "But your daughter didn't." Samuel's eyes filled. "No," he said softly. "She never did." The months that followed were not easy. Freedom did not erase 2 years of imprisonment. Samuel had to learn how to sleep without hearing prison doors. Margaret had to learn how to trust that tomorrow would not bring another bill they could not pay. Evelyn had to learn that she no longer needed to defend her father's name every time someone whispered. But life began again. Nathaniel offered Evelyn a permanent position at Boone Creek Ranch. This time no one questioned why. She had earned her place. Rose became her closest friend. Eli Turner, whose life Evelyn had helped save during the snowstorm, never again allowed anyone to speak badly about her without defending her. Even some of the men who had once called her the convict's girl began asking her advice. Walter Briggs and Caleb Mercer were eventually brought to trial. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Their scheme had robbed ranch workers of wages, destroyed Edwin Cole's life, and stolen 2 years from Samuel Hart. Justice could not return those years, but it could restore the truth. One spring morning, Evelyn stood on the porch of Boone Creek Ranch. Her father was in the pasture teaching a young ranch hand how to handle a nervous horse. Her mother sat near the window sewing. Nathaniel stepped onto the porch. He looked at the old leather valise resting beside Evelyn. "You still have that?" She smiled. "I carried it here the first day. I remember. I thought I was coming here for a job." Nathaniel looked toward the pasture. "And what did you find?" Evelyn watched her father laugh as the young horse finally settled. She thought about the morning she had arrived, the gunshot, the whispers, the word convict, the door that almost closed in her face. Then she looked at Nathaniel. "I found out that a person's name isn't the same thing as their character." Nathaniel nodded. "And yours?" Evelyn smiled. "I'm still making mine." Nathaniel looked at her with quiet respect. "You already have." The wind moved gently through the cotton woods. For 2 years, Evelyn Hart had lived beneath a name other people had turned into a sentence. She had been judged before she was known, rejected before she was heard, and treated as though her father's accusation were a stain she had inherited. But she had never allowed their judgment to decide who she would become. She had come to Boone Creek Ranch because her family needed money. She stayed because she discovered something far more important. Truth sometimes needed someone willing to stand beside it when everyone else had already walked away. And sometimes justice did not begin in a courtroom. Sometimes it began with a 19-year-old girl standing at a ranch door hearing the words, "We don't hire a convict's daughter," and finding the courage to answer, "My father may be in prison, but I am not." Evelyn looked once more toward the Montana horizon. Her father was home, her mother's future was secure, and the family name that had once been spoken with shame could finally be spoken without fear. Not because someone had forgotten what happened, but because the truth had finally been heard.